Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Well, there's a lot going on right now. There has been new updates on the Russian force composition that could be getting ready to launch a fairly large renewed offensive in Ukraine. We are seeing other happenings as well, to include of the collapse of the Moldovan government, West-leading government, and the resignation of its prime minister. So that is making headlines as well. Moldova prime minister resigns, and government collapses amid crisis, quote unquote, Euronews. But as we speak, the Russians have launched another wave of cruise missile, semi-ballistic, and drone strikes across Ukraine, targeting Ukrainian power infrastructure, targeting Ukrainian command and control elements, and really causing problems for Ukraine. And we're seeing this essentially take place every month now. This is becoming a repeated exercise by the Russians to launch a barrage of missile attacks across Ukraine to degrade and destroy both military targets and civilian energy targets as well. But again, we continue to watch very, very closely the additional Russian military buildup. There are some sources claiming now that the Russians have amassed upwards to 500,000 troops, both conscripted soldiers and non-conscripted volunteer contract soldiers as well. So again, we're seeing this massive Russian mobilization continue to take place. It looks like right now the Russians have amassed about 300,000 troops with an additional 200,000 in a strategic reserve, and are in the process of moving that strategic reserve forward. In addition, the Russians could have upwards to 2,000 main battle tanks, upwards to 1,800 main battle tanks deployed, getting ready to launch this renewed operation, possibly 1,000 tanks ready to move with an additional 800 in reserve. Additionally, upwards to 3,000 to 4,000 armored fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers, a total of 2,000 field artillery and self-propelled artillery guns, and an additional over 800 multiple launch rocket systems. So we're seeing what could be described as the onset of this operation as we speak. There is heavy fighting taking place west of Crimea, this area here. It does look like the Russians are conducting a reconnaissance in force all across the front lines, trying to gauge Ukrainian strength west of the line of contact. But is this going to be the massive Russian counter or offensive that we are anticipating? We are continuing to watch very closely what is happening near Bakhmut. The Russians continue this pressure campaign near Bakhmut. In all probability, this map is not accurate, and we believe that Russian infantry formations now control well over a third to a half of Bakhmut as we speak. Again, the Russians continue to try and cut off the ability of the Ukrainians to feed and supply its forces in Bakhmut by attempting both a southern and northern circumvention of the city. And then again, we are continuing to see a renewed Russian pressure campaign, and possibly the point of the thrust by Russian forces targeted at Seversk as well. That could come from the south towards Seversk, and then obviously from the east as well, as the Russians want to gain control of that town in its efforts to eventually launch operations towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. But again, Upwards to 500,000 Russian troops are now massing within the area of operations in and around the Donbass and southern areas near Mariupol and Melitopol. We again almost 2,000 tanks, 3,000 to 4,000 armored fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers, 2,000 artillery pieces, and 800 multiple launch rocket systems. And it could even be greater than that. It could be smaller than that. It's very difficult to ascertain at this moment. Now, the Russians do have the capability going forward of fielding even larger forces. Okay, the national military-industrial complex of the Russian state, the Russian military, has the capability to create, in all probability, a 1.5 to 2 million person ground force, fully supplied with tanks and armored fighting vehicles. And in all likelihood, we are going to see that happen. As I talked before, the Russian military, of what it looked like in 2022 to what it's going to look like in 2024, 2025 is going to be dramatically different. The die has been cast. The conflict with the West in terms of Russian perception has started, and in all probability, the Russians are preparing for even greater engagements outside the scope of Ukraine. The contingency planning, in all probability, is underway for eventual operations in the direction of Poland, in all probability Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia up here in the north. My screen is taking a while to update, but we'll head back down here to the south, but you get the point in terms of the Baltics. But again, right now, I believe we will see stage one of this Russian offensive operation, again, directed at the Donbass. I believe that the Russians will try to roll up the right flank, as I said multiple times, of Ukrainian forces. And eventually, stage two, the real operation, I believe, will occur in late summer. I believe this is a prelude of things to come. This will not be the major operation that people are anticipating from the Russians. I think the Ukrainian counteroffensive that we have heard discussed, especially towards Melitopol, and this ridiculous idea that the Ukrainians are going to retake the Crimea is really off the table at this point, given the massing of Russian troops that are building up in this area. Again, the West is going to have to supply, or would have to supply, Ukraine with tremendous amounts of weapon systems. Those weapon systems are going to take a while to get to Ukraine. And while this is occurring, while the Ukrainians are waiting for these weapon systems, the Russian military is going to expand, and expand at a greater pace, a greater rate than what the Ukrainians are bringing in, even with Western assistance. And that's just the facts on the ground. That's what's going to happen. Now, is that going to translate into a military defeat for Ukraine? Is that going to translate into military victory for Russia? We don't know yet. Again, war is war. You have battlefield commanders. Each side is going to do everything in their power to prevent the other side from achieving its military goals. That is what happens in war. Thus far, the Ukrainian host, the Ukrainian army, has conducted itself in an admirable fashion. It has done what most people did not believe what it could do. The Russians, the Russian army, the Russian ground force, especially the Russian Air Force, thus far has performed under what most analysts had predicted. Now, obviously, this is going to change. We have seen this in the past, and we will probably see this in the future in terms of especially how the Russians adapt to war. And I think we're starting to see that right now. So that's what I have for today. Thank you for joining us. More to come as we watch this massive Russian operation in the early stages, getting ready to fully kick off. I think you definitely will absolutely know it is happening once it happens. I think it's in the very early stages of reconnaissance and force, finding areas of Ukrainian weakness, and then we will see a fairly large Russian attack, followed by, again, another operation later in the summer. More to come. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.